Hello and welcome to this review of my Sega TeraDrive keyboard. Yes folks, I was finally able to procure one of these, and no, it wasn't cheap. The TeraDrive, or TeraDrive as it was pronounced in its native Japan, was a very interesting experiment. It was essentially a Sega Mega Drive, or Sega Genesis in Imperial units, integrated into a PC, and it was actually manufactured by IBM for Sega starting in 1991. Now it kind of makes sense that it was made by IBM when you look at it in more detail, but I'll get back to that in a minute. I guess the idea was to merge one of the then most popular consoles in the world, the Mega Drive, with the awesome unchallenged pinnacle of technological perfection that is a PC, so that you could on one hand enjoy your laughable kiddie console stuff, as well as your utterly superior in every way glorious master race PC. In principle, an interesting idea. However, it was released only in Japan and it didn't catch on at all, so unfortunately it did very badly and quickly faded into obscurity. The TeraDrive is one of those consoles almost nobody even knows about. However, it is somewhat well known among mechanical keyboard enthusiasts, as the keyboard it came with, the HTR-2106, which is this one, not only uses a very interesting uncommon switch type, but is also surely one of the prettiest, best-looking keyboards ever made. So because it's both rare and sought after by keyboard enthusiasts as well as vintage computer collectors, particularly those interested in obscure systems, they tend to fetch very high prices. And so did this one. Now, as they did on many other occasions where IBM produced systems in Japan, they subcontracted Alps Electric to make the keyboards for them. So what this actually ended up being was a restyled Alps SM101 in Japanese JIS layout. This here is an RM Nimbus badged SM101, which I reviewed more than 4.5 years ago, and you can clearly see the similarities. The rear side looks even more similar, by the way. It's virtually identical. Now, either intentionally or not, this keyboard has many IBM-y things about it. Most obviously perhaps is the shape, which is somewhere between that of an Alps Bigfoot and a Model M. Especially the Locklight sticker here looks very IBM. And second, it uses buckling springs, over a membrane to be specific, like a Model M. Now, these are not IBM's buckling springs, but an entirely different design made and patented by Alps themselves. They made quite a lot of changes to the original design by Richard Hunter Harris, and although the idea is the same, the execution is completely different. First of all, the springs don't buckle along the short axis of the keyboard, but lengthwise. Second, they use an actual slider, which IBM's buckling springs didn't have. And third, it's lower profile. Now, IBM's design is tall because tall springs are easier to buckle. Using shorter springs, which is ultimately necessary for a lower profile design, makes it much harder to buckle the springs because lateral movement is resisted more. In order to make it possible for the springs to buckle anyway, Alps added a follower to the hammer. This follower buckles the spring by pushing sideways directly onto the spring itself. Because it uses this follower as well as a fixed-in slider, these switches are much more mechanically reliable than IBM's design. For example, when a keycap is taken out or dislodged from a Model M or F, it's pretty common that upon replacing it, the spring becomes incorrectly seated, which makes the switch stop working. These switches don't have this problem. Also, because it uses a mechanical assist to buckle the springs, it avoids the very tight production tolerances of the Model M's design, which I guess would make it considerably easier and cheaper to produce. The sound is quite interesting too, by the way. It sounds extremely metallic, way more so than a Model M or even the RM Nimbus for some reason. In fact, it sounds like an army of tiny little bolt-action rifles. It's possibly the most mechanically sounding keyboard I've ever heard. It uses a curved assembly like a Model M and also uses melted plastic rivets like a Model M, but unlike the rivets on an M, these appear to be substantially stouter and tougher. Neither on this one nor on my RM Nimbus have any of the rivets snapped off, while it's not uncommon to see a dozen or so come off of a Model M. That said, the key feel isn't as good as a Model M in my opinion. It's more tactile for sure, and it breaks cleanly, but it's stiffer, and although it's not overtly scratchy, it feels rather rough. It's very tiring on the hands actually. I wouldn't say it's qualitatively bad. If anything, it might be quite suitable to people who want more tactile, stiffer buckling springs, but it's really not for me. To me, compared to a Model M, it feels like a Model M compared to a Model F. Similar, but noticeably worse. The build quality in general is arguably inferior to a Model M2, although admittedly this goes for almost all keyboards ever made. It weighs about 1.3 kilos rather than 2, and the case is ABS rather than PVC, so unlike the Model M it yellows, and it's more rigid and prone to breakage. Moreover, the plate is thinner than most Models M, specifically 0.8mm, which is only as thick as the really late Ms. However, it's still a very well built keyboard, and frankly the significantly better rivets mean that it's arguably actually tougher, as the rivets are a real Achilles heel on the Model M. The cable it uses is a coiled PS2 cable, so it's really easy to convert to a modern PC, and it uses a very useful cable retainer at the back. Now, uniquely, instead of being at the bottom of the keyboard, like on pretty much everything else, this retainer holds the cable up below the bezel. This is actually a really pretty nice improvement, because if you use a cable retainer placed directly at the back and the cable doesn't sit completely flush with the rear part of the housing, it makes the keyboard kind of wobble about, but this design doesn't have that problem. Probably the biggest difference in quality is the keycaps though. Unlike the IBM's thick blocks of dye-sublimed PBT, the Sega uses thin pad printed ABS. Very thankfully, this one doesn't have any of the legends damaged yet, despite a little bit of use here and there, but that's only a matter of time to be honest. And for those who were wondering, yes, they are Alps mount. They are, however, extremely gorgeous. The two-tone grey colour scheme is somewhat reminiscent of a Dolce keyboard, except not as brown and reversed, and it's much better looking in my opinion. Also, because it's of course a Japanese keyboard, it comes with Japanese character sub-legends, which adds a significant amount of coolness to it. It's a very nice looking model overall in my opinion, easily one of the best looking keyboards I own, and really the reason why it's so sought after, I guess. The JIS layout is similar to most modern full-size layouts except with some differences. It uses an ISO enter key but also uses a small backspace like most big-ass enter keyboards. I suspect that the way characters and inputs are formed on Japanese language keyboards makes it harder to make typing mistakes. Also, the spacebar, which isn't used as much from what I understand, is chopped up into 4 keys, 3 of which toggle between different sets of characters. Furthermore, there's an extra key here, and the symbols on the keys aren't completely indicative of what they actually output, which is rather confusing. Perhaps worse is that only the tiny spacebar actually outputs a spacebar. See, in the IBM 5576 I reviewed a while ago, which used the same layout, this wasn't an issue, because that was made to be completely usable on a Western PC, so they made the extra spacebars, so to speak, also output spacebar scan codes. But that's not the case here, so you really need to use this tiny sliver here, and remember that these do absolutely nothing, which is a bit annoying. Overall, it's not a keyboard I'd enjoy using for extended periods of time, but it's one hell of a showpiece. I might take it to the next meetup or something, because it really is a looker. I think if Unicomp made a Model M that looked like this, it'd sell like hotcakes. Not that they care about selling things, of course. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.